I am so fortunate to be joined here today with Amanda Tuminelli, the Executive Director and CLO at DeFi Education Fund, Chris Land, the General Counsel for U.S. Senator Cynthia Lummis, and Landon Zinda, the Counsel to the Chairman and Senior Advisor for the Crypto Task Force, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The government's always got the longest titles.
Look at all those words below my name.
Yeah. I think I got it right.
Yeah.
We could read it up there. But to start off, we're in a genuinely historic moment for crypto policy in DC. We cover it all the time on Crypto in America. We're talking about it with you guys in and out, off stage. From each of your vantage points, what would you say is the biggest single shift we have seen, I would say the last month, but maybe in the last week or two, because things move so quickly?
Starting with me?
Yeah, Amanda, please.
I think the biggest shift for people who are building in this space is that they actually feel like they can talk to members of the government and regulators about what they're building and get proactive advice that's actually helpful to them. Just this morning, we got really great guidance, staff guidance from the SEC about front ends. I don't think anybody would have imagined that we would have gotten something like that 3 or 4 years ago. We have people working on market structure who actually understand the technology and want to make rules that work for it. So I think that is a big shift.
I think the biggest shift that I've seen is just kind of the unified whole of government approach. You know, we have Congress, we have the regulators kind of rowing in more or less the same direction. And there's nothing, to use a college football analogy, there's nothing like momentum. When you have momentum, it's unstoppable. And I feel like all the coordination we're seeing is really powerful.
Yeah, and I'm from the SEC, so I have a small disclaimer. It's not as long as the commissioners, but I am a staffer at the commission. I don't speak for the commission. And now that I got that out of the way, I will put in a small plug for our interpretation, which I think was released within the month, which is really foundational to a lot of the work that we're working on. But I think as staff, we kind of moved beyond it and thought about what to do next, but it's really foundational. It's probably one of the biggest things we'll do, clarifying as much as we can the commission's interpretation of the Howey test, when something is or is not a security, and when something that may have been part of an investment contract ceases to be part of that.
And Amanda brought this up, Landon, but today the SEC also issued a new staff statement regarding broker-dealer registration of certain user interfaces utilized to prepare transactions in crypto asset securities. That was a lot for me to say there, but I copy and pasted the headline. And for the audience not familiar with this, what does it mean and why is it so important today?
Yeah, so at the SEC, we put out a lot of different products. This one is a staff statement, which means it is not a commission statement. The commissioners did not vote on it. The staff of Trading and Markets issued this statement, saying generally, if your product falls within these certain lines, it's not required to register as a broker. Commissioner Peirce put out a statement as well. I think she really wants to take a look at the definition of broker. In our rules, it means to effectuate transactions. What does that mean? You can interpret it a lot of different ways, and I think she'd like to see some honing in of that definition, where things here that are clearly you providing instructions to an app to do exactly what you tell it to do shouldn't fall within our remit, and is really just another application in this economy. So. Trying to right-size those definitions. We have a number of different definitions, broker, exchange. I'm just a staffer. I think Commissioner Peirce would want to look at a bunch of those things.
Maybe Chris, from the legislative angle on the Hill, how much of digital assets are actually being codified versus still dependent on agency interpretation?
That's a really, really interesting question.
Thank you.
I like to think that there's some cross-pollination between the legislation. The first digital asset bill that was put out by one of the committees was in 2020. We did Lummis Gillibrand for the first time in 2022, building off of a lot of the good work from Commissioner Peirce. And they've kind of taken some of our ideas and they're kind of running with it now. And I don't necessarily think they're mutually exclusive. I think they're supportive. Obviously, legislation is absolutely necessary to really make this a sustainable path. In 2029, I guarantee you, if there's a change of administration, and Senator Warren is, back with her teeth in the financial services industry, there will be there will be many of those things that are happening at the SEC now will be rolled back very quickly. So we need legislation to provide that, sustainability and kind of, one of the things that's really worried my boss the last few years is financial regulatory policy is beginning to shift kind of on a pendulum like the rest of DC, and it's not really good for the markets. We need more level-headed, more kind of an even keel when it comes to financial regulation, and I'm a little bit worried that, we're going to see kind of a hard shift back the other way in 2029 if we don't do our jobs properly.
And if I could just add to that and complement that, I totally agree with that. A lot of the work that we're doing is complement to legislation, is a bridge to that legislation. We can only interpret the law, we cannot make it, and the commissioners very much support clarity and want to see that bill enacted. And it is to future-proof regulation here, as the chair would say.
I know a lot of people want this industry to be seen as bipartisan, and then sometimes we are one side and then maybe middle. I don't know about the other side. But do you guys feel like we are at a bipartisan point, or it still feels a bit contentious? And if it is, how do we kind of get back to that bipartisan level playing field on that seesaw, so to speak?
I agree with the premise. This should not be a bipartisan issue. Regulating an asset class should absolutely not be a partisan issue. I think that to the extent that it's not, it's because there's either a reticence to learn what the technology actually does, or just an entrenchment of views about what should be regulated and how. But I think that we at DEF have worked with people in both the Democratic and Republican Party. We're happy to do that. We've provided resources to people on both sides of the aisle. And I think certainly the industry, to the extent that I speak to people in the industry, wants this to stay bipartisan. That's
a really important question, and one of the things Senator Lummis has done from the beginning is to make crypto policy bipartisan. We would only introduce new bills if we had a Democratic co-sponsor, because in the Senate, to get to 60 votes, you ultimately have to have at least some buy-in from the other side. We've done this even in the face of attacks from our own side. We have gotten more than you would expect, that amount of pressure from other Republican offices that have been trying to have us make this into kind of a partisan football, and I'm proud of the work we've done across the aisle. It's probably one of the most bipartisan issues still remaining in Congress. Like most issues, there's just not going to be any prospect of getting anything done, but the fact that we're sitting here right now with a more than realistic possibility of getting clarity done is a testament to how bipartisan this is.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of, Landon, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I used to work in the House for Representative Tom Emmer, and at one point he was the National Republican Congressional Committee chairman, meaning his job was to re-elect more Republicans in the House, and he would go around saying crypto is a nonpartisan issue. It's not even bipartisan, it's nonpartisan. And that meant a lot. That was directly from him. I don't think I was working for him at that point. He just actually thought that, and that's how good policies here are going to move forward.
Mm-hmm. How do you push back on the pressure when people do try to make it partisan?
You have to explain to people the process, and it's usually just them covering up for other things they don't want to tell you, like they don't actually want legislation to pass or something like that. It's usually just the people that really understand how Congress works knows that being bipartisan is essential. So, yeah.
Yeah. You also brought up clarity, so you opened the door. Thank you. Stablecoin legislation is probably the most talked about piece of the Clarity Act puzzle right now. Do you feel that we are getting close to a deal coming in?
Yeah, I think we made a ton of progress the last few months. Congress hasn't been sitting around doing nothing. We've been negotiating clarity, ever since the infamous tweet on January 14th.
What was the tweet?
One of the big crypto exchange CEOs had some thoughts on Senator Lummis's bill. So we kind of took those and we ran with that. We are in a good place on stablecoin yield. We were kind of wrapping up the other issues that we've kind of been working on in the background. Like Patrick Witt has done a great job negotiating the stablecoin yield text for the last 3 months. We landed in a good place on that, and I've been kind of working on the other issues in the bill, like tokenization, DeFi, token classification, and ethics. And right now, we are engaged in the process of landing the plane on those other issues. And we can certainly do it. We could do it this week, probably. We're just kind of making our final preparations to hopefully announce a markup date in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I know Patrick Witt came on Crypto in America on Friday and told us that they have reached a compromise, that he is confident that various parties will stand by it. So I guess TBD, optimistic? Amanda,
I'm confident, just like Patrick is, the various parties will stand by the text that's been agreed to. Because I think people are tired of fighting the stablecoin yield wars. We landed in a place that makes both sides somewhat unhappy, which is, I think, is the right place.
We all get to be unhappy together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wonderful. Yeah. And then Amanda, maybe from the DeFi side, we've also had you on the show to talk about this. But do you feel like there has been true progress for builders? Or are we still trying to put the DeFi infrastructure into the old rails? And if so, how do you kind of like push back on that?
Oh, I think there's been huge progress made. I mean, the state of the bill right now has so many concepts in it that I would not have imagined a bill having 3 or 4 years ago, right? Like we are talking about concepts like what does it mean to have unilateral control over digital assets? That is a new concept that is actually grounded in the reality of how the tech functions. So I think having those smart conversations and those really like tech-grounded concepts is definitely progress. I think we're also making progress in explaining the difference between cybersecurity issues and issues inherent to DeFi or certain parts of the ecosystem. So I think there's a good focus on how to move forward, and I think that everybody's been working really productively on DeFi.
Mm-hmm. And then Landon, I know in the past you've talked about innovation exemptions. What does that actually look like for maybe people in the audience that aren't familiar with that term? And then if anyone, who would be responsible in that system?
Yeah, so various people at the SEC have been talking about the innovation exemption for several months now. I think you could think of it, and, none of this is finalized, but you could think of it as someone who's providing liquidity for tokenized stocks on something like an AMM. Like, what does that look like? What guardrails should be around that? That is one exemption, and people have talked about it like the innovation exemption. There are many other things that we're working on. The staff of Trading and Markets is talking about broker regulation. The chairman has talked about Reg Crypto, which can include exemptions as well for fundraising. I like to think of this in a much broader context of what sort of tailoring needs to occur for broker regulation, what sort of tailoring needs to occur for exchange, do we include clearing agencies, how do dealers fit in the mix? This is a fulsome, broad scope of innovations and exemptions that could be applied. So I think a lot of people have focused on the innovation exemption, but it's really just one part of this broader overview. How do we appropriately tailor regulations for trading of stocks on these things?
Which part do you find the most significant that you guys are working on today, from your perspective?
Commissioner Peirce had a lot of good, interesting things to say about this staff statement and the broker definition. I've already talked about kind of the broad way you could interpret effectuating transactions. I think for her as well, the definition of exchange, what does it mean to bring buyers and sellers together? Is it groups of people? All sorts of different ways you could look at this definition to expand it like it was in the past administration or contract it. I think she'd like to see the commission pursue rulemaking on that just to appropriately tailor it, and regulations and laws that were almost a century old probably didn't contemplate crypto, and we should recognize that, and that's part of the reason I think that the commissioners are supportive of legislation. Is this is the way to actually appropriately tailor these things and put that into law, not have regulators figure this out with no laws. Yeah.
I mean, I've also had conversations with some people where they have this perception that it's like, okay, it's either going to be legislation like Clarity or SEC guidance, but they struggle to wrap their minds around both coexisting. And maybe that's due to like the historical factors that may be under previous administrations. But what does it actually look like when guidance and legislation work together?
People like to make it more complicated than it actually is. It is Schoolhouse Rock. It is like
You guys are all jamming together?
I'm just a bill.
I'm just a bill. You pass the bill, it becomes law. The regulator only implements the law.
Yeah.
We're not creating new law here. All we can do is interpret what existing law is. So it's really that simple. And if we can try to tailor things, but if there isn't new rules to future-proof new law, then we can be at this pendulum. And I think the commissioners at the SEC want to keep this as nonpartisan as possible. And we do aim to do things that could be longer term, like things that kind of make sense where the next administration comes in and is like, well, people have been relying on this. This isn't an unreasonable, application of the law. Let's keep it and maybe change it a little bit, but we don't know that, and only laws can make sure that stays.
Chris and Amanda, what do you think about that?
No, I think Landon got it right. Typically, guidance, in this day where bills don't pass Congress, guidance usually comes before legislation, and the Constitution, in Article 1 says guidance usually comes after the legislation's passed. So we've gotten to the point in our legislative process, which is broken at so many levels, that guidance has to kind of fill the gap until Congress can pass legislation. It's not good governance. It's not sustainable in any way. So that's the reason why we're all hoping that Clarity can pass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need both. I think that we need durable statutory law to provide the basis for jurisdiction, to define the scope of that jurisdiction, to talk about what's in or out of regulation, and then we need regulators to build on that and tell us more specifically how regulations apply to certain technology. So I think you need both. You also need no action relief. You need guidance. There's a whole host of things that regulators do to build on top of statutes that I think is really important.
Guidance is kind of a new phenomenon. Guidance, it's mainly meant to fill in the gaps in legislation that Congress couldn't possibly think of, just to interpret the text. I mean, look at Genius. I thought we did a pretty good job on Genius, but it turns out there's some things that need a little further explanation, and that's the point of guidance, that's the point of rulemaking, is to kind of build on that.
What else needs further explanation? What are the gaps?
Oh, Genius? Substantially similar. What's substantially similar to the OCC's rulemaking is becoming a hot topic among the state regulators these days. The Treasury's substantially similar rulemaking has, raised some questions among some of the state bank regulators about, what it means to really be truly substantially similar.
What about on the front of the DeFi safe harbor conversations? I know there's been a lot on that realm. Or arguments to launch them so innovations can continue to happen within this safe harbor framework, as the name suggests, right? Could that realistically be something that we could get enshrined by Congress, or is it something that's too far from where policymakers are today?
I think if we're talking about a safe harbor from securities regulation or commodities regulation, then I think we're talking about whether the agencies can provide something like that through rulemaking, or some similar kind of exemption-based framework. I don't know if it's something, I don't know if it's really something for Congress to do, but I definitely think it's something that the agencies could do. I also think looking at the staff statement from this morning, providing that kind of forward-looking, if your user interface does these things, then you don't need to register as a broker, is even more helpful in some ways, because it's now people can build to spec and understand what their user interfaces can and can't do, and then people will keep building, right? And then we'll have either no action relief or people building on what other people have already done.
Yeah.
I would kind of ask, what is DeFi? There's a bunch of terms in crypto I think mean different things to different people. Is Bitcoin DeFi? People would typically say no, but isn't Bitcoin completely decentralized finance? And Is it DeFi if you and one other person sign your 2 of 5 multi-sig to change things? Is that DeFi? Maybe it is. What are our definitions here, and what should be carved out and what's not? If it's simply published code on Ethereum, I don't know what sort of limits you can put on that from like a constitutional perspective. So depending on your definition, DeFi, I think, is already carved out under the Constitution.
What is your definition of DeFi then?
If DeFi is simply just published code on Ethereum, on anywhere,
Yeah.
there's no, what's the term? There's no, government cannot preempt the publishing of code.
Yeah. It's well-established case law, First Amendment. Yep.
I mean, I think the SEC also just put out a really great definition of DeFi in the token taxonomy. I think it was in a footnote, but it was there. And it described DeFi as a system over which no person has unilateral control, right? No one can rug you, nobody can steal your money, nobody can move your money without you having say in it, and it's a self-directed financial transaction for the user. So I think the SEC actually did a great job recently of describing a decentralized system.
Do you find that the definition is maybe overcomplicated outside of, not the SEC's definition, but like other people when you're having conversations and you're trying to explain it to them, and it just becomes this big like mumble jumble of words?
Yeah.
I think DeFi has become a marketing term, and it should instead be a term that is used to describe technology and activities that people do with technology. So I think from our perspective, we are trying to have, at the DeFi Education Fund, we are trying to have good hygiene about what we say is DeFi and what is not. We're not the arbiters of that, but we at least define it. And there are gradations, there are gray areas, of course, like as Landon was saying, like, is a certain multi-sig arrangement DeFi or not? I don't think that's for us to answer. I think there's a spectrum of decentralization, and people move along that spectrum, and there is an end point that is fully decentralized, but there are people on that spectrum doing different activities, and I don't know if it's on anybody to say this is DeFi or this is not. And it's a separate question from should you be regulated. I think there's that confusion that if you're DeFi, you're not regulated. I don't think that that is the dispositive question about regulation.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people, like you said, it is a marketing term for many where they just say they're like a DeFi project and nothing about it is decentralized though.
And that's a problem.
Yeah, that's the spectrum. Yeah, that's the front of the spectrum, away from the completely decentralized side, right? Yeah.
That's what Clarity Section 301 challenges that paradigm in many ways. You know, we're separating the wheat from the chaff, as it were, and this is DeFi and this is not DeFi. And that was spicy when it first landed, if you remember. That was a kind of a big move by Congress, but I think it was the right one.
Do any teams push back on that? Like, hey, we're actually DeFi, you're wrong? Nobody wants to name them?
Yeah. I think some people have heartburn with it, but they are potentially camouflaging their heartburn about that provision in other ways.
There's also a strong institutional Wall Street audience in the crowd today, and I've been talking to at the event. What would be kind of your advice or a conversation you would like to have with them on maybe the front of like what's actually happening in DC that they should pay attention to because it impacts them from like external team looking in to integrate with digital assets opposed to like inside looking out? Does that make sense?
What should they be thinking? What exactly is it?
Yeah, like if you're gonna have a conversation with some institutional player here, they're like kind of learning and observing, how would you kind of approach that? Like in terms of what to pay attention to in DC?
I would say don't just observe, come and engage. I think we're doing a lot to fundamentally change the culture of the SEC. When I started like a year and a half ago, kind of with this new administration, if it was a remote meeting, everyone would have their cameras off, no one would speak. If it was an in-person meeting, no one would ask questions. We'd be this sort of standoff, 12 people, intimidating people in front of like 3 people that would come in. We ask staff to engage and meet with people and discuss with them and ask questions. And it is a fundamental cultural change that has taken some time, but is is proving some of its worth. If you come in and get, like, if you work at the SEC and do crypto policy, you cannot touch any cryptocurrency at all. I don't have a wallet. You have to figure out a way to destroy your wallet. If you cannot even get dusted because you don't have a wallet. It helps if people who work with the tech come in and explain it to us, and we can ask questions and we can engage with them, and that's how we tailor regulation to when it's appropriate and when it's not. And if we don't understand it, we're never going to come up with the right regulations. So I'd say if you're an institution who's like just watching DC and doesn't know what to do or whether to engage, come talk to us, because it will help us figure out what's existing out there, how you're thinking about it, and we can explain how we're thinking about it.
I mean, y'all even have little buttons that say, "Hi, my name is, I'm from the Crypto Task Force, I want to talk to you." It's actually pretty cool. So that's the most tangible thing that there's been a culture shift at the SEC.
And if you meet with us from New York, we'll turn on our cameras.
I just think from my perspective, no perfect piece of legislation's ever passed Congress, like probably ever. I mean, maybe the Bill of Rights, you know, that constitutional amendment when it passed Congress shortly after the founding. So I would just say, we need a bill we can all live with. Please don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. We have a good bill. Perfect. The best bill I ever wrote was in 2024, and it's, you know, we have to make compromises to move the process forward. So I would just say, when it comes to the legislative process and engaging with your members of Congress, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good.
Amanda?
I feel like they covered it. I don't really have anything. I don't really have anything else to add.
Okay. Last thing, I think I might know the answer for the panelists, but I'll still ask. What is something, if we fast forward 12 months from today, that you think will be true that does not exist today on the front of DC and digital assets?
I mean, to my point just now about how we are changing the culture and engaging, the commissioners have been pretty vocal about what we're working on, and they've given speeches on Reg Crypto, which is Hester's safe harbor that she's been talking about for 5 years. How do you do a fundraise, maybe have a centralized fundraise, provide disclosures, and then at some point be decentralized, or our definition of DeFi, no unilateral control, and at some point cease to be a security. We move slowly and deliberately, but hopefully it will be out in 12 months, as well as the innovation exemption, which I explained is kind of how do you deal with tokenized securities trading on AMMs.
I'm not gonna be a wimp and not take the bait. I'm gonna say that Clarity is gonna pass, and we're gonna be into rulemaking on Clarity. And I also think the Federal Reserve has a really interesting proposal on providing access to innovative companies. The payment account proposal that Governor Waller is working on. If you're not paying attention to that, you should be. It's a huge, huge paradigm shift for the Fed, and I'm hopeful and cautiously optimistic that will be done too.
And I'll manifest that software developer protections will be enshrined in law either through the market structure bill or in regulation, one way or the other.
I love it. We're ending on a positive note. Amanda, Chris, Landon, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for listening in.